Your business is already working. Your message is landing, you're getting sales, but right now, every piece of content you create disappears in a day. And that's where a podcast comes in. Inside the Profitable Podcast Launch Accelerator, you and I are going to launch your podcast in 60 days flat with a full first season designed to bring in leads, nurture your audience, and drive sales. No more guessing what to say or scrambling for episode ideas or adding another thing to your to-do list. We build the strategy, you just show up and record. The price is going up soon as this offer exits beta, and I want to make sure you have an opportunity to jump in before that happens. So head on over to uncommonlymore.com/accelerator and book your spot now. Often podcasters are left feeling like they've cracked some kind of code. They have figured out some missing piece in their business when they launch their podcast, only for it to be 3 or 5 or maybe 10 episodes later, and it's feeling like an impossible task where they're getting no feedback, and they aren't getting any of the juice that they promised that they were going to get from this particular squeeze. When I sit down with them and we talk about their show and we talk about their process, it's often a case of making one or several of the 5 mistakes we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. It is deceptively easy to make the mistakes we're going to talk about today, not just when we initially launch our show, but in the course of the week in, week out of getting our show done, of getting our episodes out the door. These same things can creep up. So I want you to listen to this with the mindset of checkpoints, with the mindset of revisiting these things. I want to be really clear that these are mistakes you can make more than once. I want to be clear that these are mistakes I make, even now, from time to time. It's easy to fall into the rut of making the mistakes we're going to talk about today. And so as I go through this and as we talk this through, I don't want this to be from the place of punishment, from the place of I screwed this up and so I can't be good at this. No, that's not where we're at. Where we are at is, these are the things I see myself falling into. These are the points where my show hits rough waters. What are the scaffolding elements that I can put in to hold my show up above these, and we're going for it, troubled waters, right? There's so much we are managing right now in the world, in our lives personally, in our lives professionally. There's so much. And so take these not as, I've screwed this up and it means I can't be successful with this. And instead, look for the points in where you can build in support to hold you up. And so that you can start avoiding these mistakes. Where can you build bridges that allow you to bypass? I'm going for it again. These troubled waters. I don't know why it's my praise to shore, but it is. Before we jump into this, I want to remind you, if you haven't yet, be sure to check out that's right, the podcast newsroom. We've got a brand new episode coming out next week. I cannot wait to share it with you. If you didn't hear the episode of this show from last week, make sure you check it out, because we gave a little sneak preview to what happens over on the podcast newsroom. And I pulled an episode from over there on salesiness in your content. I brought it over here so that you could hear exactly what happens on the podcast newsroom. And make sure, if you haven't yet, you sign yourself up for the podcast newsroom over at thepodcastnewsroom.com. Let's dig into this, because I want to move through 5 mistakes. So pacing is going to be critical. All right. I want to jump just right in. If you're cool with that. Are you cool? All right, let's jump right in. Number 1, they launch without a clear business goal. They launch their show because, and I'm laughing because this is the maybe most common pushback I get is I'll ask someone why they started their podcast and they'll be like, oh, well, I had a coach who told me that this is a really good way to nurture your audience. Famous coach words. And I'll go, cool. So, like, what role do you want it to play in your business? And they're like, oh, well, I want to be a thought leader. I want to position myself as a thought leader. And I'm like, cool. More jargonness. What are your goals from the show? I want to really build a listenership. Cool. So you have no tangible, like, I want to leverage this tool to put me on stages, to grow my email list, to sell my templates that are in my template shop. We've got a couple of web designers who we've been through intensives with this year where that was really the case. I am building these incredible templates, but I need a way to consistently be driving traffic to them, to be talking about them, to be educating people on how to leverage them and get their best value out of them. And I don't want to have to do that through a whole series of trainings after they've bought it and there's these things that they want done that just aren't a good idea. Cool. This is a great way to do. There's a clear A to B direction. It makes sense the role your podcast is playing in your business. If you're not clear on the role your podcast plays in your business, lead generation, authority building, client conversion, whatever, then it's not the right time. And if you've been podcasting for a while and now your big reason for podcasting is that you've done it for a while, it's time to revisit this. Because this is one of those mistakes that I see repeated, that I see come up and show up in situations where we're working with a client in an intensive and they have had a show for a while and it's just not doing the job they wanted it to do. Like I'm talking about with these web designers, and we've had a couple of graphic designers that fall into the same boat, or they're trying to sell templates, Canva templates, Show It templates, Squarespace templates, whatever it is. It's these leveraged or passive income kind of sources where it's not done for you. It's kind of done on your own, but they're selling it to maybe a user base who's not totally clear on how to make that decision. And so we build the podcast and we build those assets to educate them on how they use the thing they buy from them. You build a more informed clientele. You reduce the number of customer service issues you have. That was a big win for one of my clients. But also, you position yourself as an expert. If you're looking to buy a template because you want to sort of reduce your upfront website costs as a new business owner, are you going to buy it from the one that you just found randomly? Or are you going to buy it from the web design expert that has been teaching you the language, what to look out for, who's been equipping you to make this decision confidently? And then when you make that purchase, because you made it confidently, again, you reduce those customer service issues. And so we've had it happen for existing shows. We've also seen it happen for shows where they've come to me and they're like, hey, I want to launch this podcast. I'm really excited. Full transparency. This is an issue we ran into early in the agency. And this is something I really struggled with. And it's why a launch offer has taken me so long to build out. Because for the last few years, our stance has been a hard no on launches. We only worked with clients who were coming with an existing podcast. And it's because when we first launched the agency in late 2018, early 2019, I worked with a couple of clients who were ready to launch a podcast. They were excited to launch a podcast, but they were struggling with where it really fit in their business. They were struggling with where it really was going to make the difference for them. They were excited mostly because somebody told them they should be excited, and it wasn't me. It was generally business coaches or biz besties who were like, I've got one, you should do it too. And they didn't really see where it fit into their business. They didn't really want to, they struggled a lot with, will my kind of offer, especially for, one person I'm thinking of in particular was a very high touch service provider. They were stepping into businesses with their clients and really standing beside them in running their client's business. I'm talking high touch, not working with many people, but the people she worked with, they were working with very deeply. And that was a struggle to figure out for her where a podcast could really help her get those kinds of clients, because in her mind, it just wasn't going to work. And it ultimately ended up being that we worked together for 3 or 4 months. They recorded a couple of episodes. We kept going round and round, and it was just like, you know what? This is actually not something I want to do. That's ultimately where we got to in our conversations, is they actually didn't have any interest in doing this because, again, for them, there wasn't a clear business win. They already had the number of clients they wanted to have. It was just something someone had told them was a logical next step. And I'm really grateful that we were able to come to that clarification with them, come to that insight with them, because there's no reason to step into this apparatus, take on this commitment, if it's not how you want to communicate, if it's not how you see your clients coming in. Now, I will say, because I need to physically for myself, that absolutely could have worked. The business model that this person had does not mean a podcast isn't a good idea. I work not indifferently from this. We are a high-touch, done-for-you service provider. That's what my team and I do, is produce. The largest part of my business is our production clients. We've got the accelerator, we've got intensives. I sell those as well. But the largest part of our revenue, the largest part of the time spent by myself or anyone on my team, is in our standard 12-month production clients, contracts. That's the bulk of our work, and will always, from my perspective, remain. I shouldn't say always, because life is life, but I don't see that changing anytime soon. That's our bread and butter. It is the foundation of this business, and it's something I really love doing, and I like the way we support our clients in that way. I absolutely sell that work through this show. I absolutely see a return on the investment of this show into those kind of clients. I would argue that this content here sells those clients the easiest. Those are the clients who most frequently are like, oh yeah, I absorbed the podcast and now it's time for me to step into production. And so it wasn't so much that their belief that this wouldn't work was right. It was that this ultimately wasn't the kind of content they wanted to be creating. It felt like a big lift. It felt like a task. This person is honestly the opposite of me. I struggled so deeply writing blog posts early in my business because I hate writing. I don't love it. There is a much bigger filter between my brain and my hands than there is in my brain and my mouth. When I'm writing, I somehow magically remove all personality and anything interesting about myself. I don't know how I do it. This client was the opposite. When they had the freedom to write, it made it really easy. It just poured out of them. But when they sat down to record, they struggled because there was a voice in their head editing them as they talked. And so this wasn't the best medium for them. But because they initiated our work from the space of someone told me this was a good idea, instead of a clear business goal, when we started introducing that clear business goal, when we started looking at, okay, where are we putting people? How have you been putting people? How do we do that in this medium? That became really clear. That this is not the way they wanted to communicate with their clients. This was not the way their best clients wanted to be communicated with. So it was in finding that clear business goal for their podcast that we were able to identify that the podcast wasn't the right fit for them. And so this piece, this understanding, having a really clear business goal so that you're looking at, cool, who am I talking to? What do they need to know? Where are they going? Where are we trying to to direct them to what are the holes we need to fill for them before they get there. That's what I'm talking about with strategic content. And when you start to look at those, you're going to find out really quickly if this is going to be sustainable for you. And so it's going to get you off the path really early if that's the route out needed. And for those who this is the right path for, you're going to be building a solid road, not just clearing out a dirt path. You're going to be building something that people can travel on behind you with a clear understanding that this is the road that gets them to the destination they're looking for. It's instead of sort of haphazardly clearing a trail, people who are really interested can persevere and hike down. Do you hear and feel that difference? It's huge. The next piece is something we've talked about recently, which is they focus a lot on the tech and not enough on the plan, not enough on the strategy. It's really easy to feel productive early in your podcast by going and getting fancy tech. It can feel like a really easy way to make your existing show better. I'm going to upgrade my microphone. I'm going to add video. I'm going to make my show more expensive, but I'm not going to look at the root of what I'm doing with my show. You worry about the mic, the software, but you don't have a plan. You don't know why you're putting each episode out. Good strategy will always outperform fancy production. We talked a lot about this a couple of weeks ago. I will link that episode in the show notes in case you missed it. But if you are investing in high-end equipment before you're sitting down and building out a clear understanding of why you're releasing each episode, you're going to struggle. And you're going to struggle for a long time. Because the equipment is not what gets you the end result. The content does. What you're actually saying matters a lot more than what you're saying it into. Before you upgrade your gear, before you invest in adding video, I want you to look at, do I have a sales strategy built into my content plan? Do I have a content strategy that moves listeners towards making the decision around whether working with me is the right next step for them? And if that answer is no, or worse, unclear, that's the thing you need to address first. That's the problem. That's the red flag. That's the burning village. That's where we need to get in and make a change. And that could be working with somebody. This is honest to goodness why we built the podcast strategy intensives. Because for some folks, DIYing their show or working whatever production process they're working in right now works for them to get their show out each and every week. But they don't have a plan. They don't know why they're putting those episodes out. There's no rhythm or reason to the content going out. There's no sales strategy in their content plan. Solve that problem first. Mistake number 3, and again, if you want to dig deeper into mistake number 2, dig into the episode in the show notes. Mistake number 3, you are stuck in a weekly task instead of in asset development. Your podcast is a weekly to-do item. It is not a sales asset you release every week. Most people launch their show and then immediately go into survival mode. Because they record their first 3. They release those first 3 because, yes, that's a good idea. And you hear that from everybody, including me, who's ever talked about launching a podcast. Put your first couple of episodes out. And then they go, I'm so excited to launch this. I'm just going to do it. And they launched those 3 episodes. And now it's just about getting the 4th episode out. And then it's just about getting the 5th episode out. And then it's just about getting the 6th episode out. And I bet you know what comes next. Generally pod fade. Generally no more episodes because it's unsustainable. A strategic podcast is not a content machine. It is not an ATM where people can come and get your wisdom on demand. It is a long-term business asset. Instead of asking yourself when you sit down to record, what do my clients need to hear this week? Or what should I talk about this week? This is the question I most frequently get. You need to be asking, how is this episode connected to what I'm selling now? You need to be asking, if this is what I'm selling now, what do they need to know to buy it? What are the questions my best leads are asking about the thing I'm selling them right now? So if I'm selling the Launch Accelerator, what are the questions my clients who are going to be the best fit for that program are asking themselves right now? Spoiler alert, they're wondering what mistakes they might make as they launch their show. They're wondering what mistakes they might be making in their show right now. They're wondering what is happening in their show right now that is causing the discomfort they have right now. Notice that all of those questions are answered in this episode. That's why this episode is happening. Not because I needed to get one out today. Not because it was time to do this again. Because I sell strategic podcast production. That's done through launches. That's done through intensive. That's done through full production services. But it's done with a clear understanding of the things we've talked about today and the things yet to talk about today. And so I need to be speaking to the questions you may have before we do that work. And sometimes they're questions you don't even know you have because you haven't quite gotten to the question yet. And that's my favorite. I love when I can bring a question and an answer to you before you even have time to ask it yourself, because it means that when you ask it more deeply. You ask a more specific version of it. This is one of the reasons I love getting on sales calls with people who listen to the podcast, which is 9 out of 10 of my sales calls. I always have that one rogue one that found me on Google and booked it, and that's great, and I love those too. But when they come in and they've listened to this podcast, we're able to move down a layer. We're not just asking questions about podcasting, they're asking about specific questions about their podcast and in their business. It's, Stacey, I know you talked about XYZ, but when I'm looking at this, how can I make this work here? That's what I want to be creating, is those kinds of conversations. Because those kind of conversations, they convert fast. They also tend to be my best clients. They're the ones showing up. They're the ones engaged. They're the ones getting results. They're the ones just getting in and answering the questions their clients have before they buy from them. Because they know how impactful it is, because they have seen it work in their own activity as buyers. So shift your show from your to-do list, from a task that you need to do just to keep digging this content hole, and instead think about how you're planting seeds, how you're then harvesting those seeds. Start treating your show like a long-form asset that allows you to do more and more and more, that allows you to use it in lots of ways, and not just, I got another episode out this week, let's hope I can do the same next week. Which honestly is a big factor in mistake number 4 as well, which is you have no podcast promotion. This is huge. And the reason I stacked it here is because this is directly related to that survival mode. This is a symptom of your show being in survival mode. If you're somebody who's going, I've got these great marketing assets and I just never get them out, it's because you're so stuck in getting your show done, you cannot tell people your show exists, which is why your show is not growing. Which is why your show is not doing the thing you want your show to do. You might have great content in it, but you have no capacity to promote it. I find that this is honestly less a strategy problem and more a process problem. This is really common for folks who are DIYing their show because There's a reason people pay my team and I to do it. It's a lot of tasks. It's a lot of things. There are steps that have to happen, and they just do. Shows got to get edited. Transcripts got to get made. Show notes have to get created. Marketing assets have to be created if they're going to be used. And when you are producing a podcast without the strategy elements I've talked about up to this point, you're not building anything that you can repurpose. And so you still feel like you're creating social media content all the time, and it feels detached from your podcast, or you're struggling to keep your social media content up and out because you're so focused on your podcast instead of strategically building a podcast that can be repurposed into all of those other things. I'm going to be 100% transparent and real with you, as always. There's like 1% of my social media content that isn't directly repurposed from this podcast. And it's like when something interesting happens and I like pop on stories, or like I have a random thought on Threads. Everything else you see is pulled from this podcast. Are moments that I have said, or thoughts I have had, or conversations that have been pulled from this show. My transcripts are what I use to create my social content. That's it. That's how the show gets promoted, is because I'm using the stuff from inside the show to promote the show and to promote everything around the show. And so each step gets easier. The same's true for my emails, by the way. My social media marketing, my email marketing, everything is built off of this. This asset is leveraged to create all of those things so that it gets easier to actually promote it. And that's valuable because of the strategy work I'm doing at the front of the production process. Because I'm putting out content attached to my sales goals, in alignment with what I'm selling, in remembrance of the person I'm selling to. These things only get easier when we line them up together, when we start thinking about them together. And ultimately, we have to come to this last mistake. And that's an understanding that no matter how strategically you build your show, no matter how great a job you do at marketing your show, no matter how fantastically produced and wonderfully sounding your show is, it is a long-term strategy. It takes time to build momentum, to grow an audience. With that said, a podcast with a plan, a podcast with a strategy will work faster because it's designed to work. You're going to see results more quickly when you build something intended to create results. And I don't just mean from a content perspective, but also from a process perspective. That's why when we sit down in the accelerator, we're building you a 12-week content plan, but we're also building you a launch plan. We're also building you a show marketing plan, because you need to have an understanding of how you use what you're creating in your podcast to market your podcast, to get your podcast in front of other people, because it can't convert leads that aren't there. It simply can't. Now, I'm going to be real with you. I put this last because it is the problem most people think of first. And the reality is it doesn't matter how well you're marketing your show. It doesn't matter how many people are aware of your show. If it is not built to convert, it's never going to bring in clients. But even if it is well built, it will take time. It is a long-term asset, evidenced by the fact that this podcast works for me for years after I've released episodes. We have clients we've signed in the last 12 months who had never heard of me before. They didn't follow me on social. They weren't subscribed to my email list. They didn't know who I was at all. They Googled a problem, a question, whatever. They found an episode of my show that answered it, because this show is built to answer the questions you have about podcasting. 2 in the morning when I'm sound asleep. And that got them to book the call, to have the conversation, to get in work with us. For they and I to sit down and build their plan and see it work in their business. That's what I talk about when I'm talking about building an asset, something that works long after release week. And it's one of the things I point to again and again when I want to highlight the long-term strategy. I have clients who have email episodes in their onboarding sequences that they released 18, 24, 36 months ago. And they're still helping them convert clients early in that subscription process because we built a long-term asset. Because we built something that was going to work not just the day they released it, not just the week they released it, for years later. And that's where I want you to focus. Because the episodes you're creating right now might not get you clients right now if the episodes you're creating right now are episode 1, 2, and 3. What they are going to do is build you loyal listeners. What they are going to do is build you recommendations and referrals. And yes, if you build the show intentionally, it might also convert you some clients, especially if you have an existing audience already. Especially if what you're bringing to the podcast is messaging and content that you've already seen working on your social media channels. Maybe you're one of the tons of experts I've talked to recently who are seeing great success on Threads, or who see really good sales success inside of Instagram through their stories and DMs. And they're thinking, do I really need a podcast? All of this is working. I can't find your Instagram post 2 years later. I can find the podcast episode you did, though. And because you have all of this evidence that this content works, cool. Our accelerator call is going to be easy because we're just going to shift that into long-form podcast content. We're just going to iterate that into your first 12 episodes. And now you have 12 solid long-term assets that will work for the next 2 years. And if you keep your show going, that library grows and grows and grows and keeps working with you. And now you can be pulling your social media content out of that. So you create that one long-form piece, and everything downstream of that is created for you. That's huge. If you want to avoid the mistakes we've talked through today and launch with a plan, launch with a purpose, and launch with a clear understanding of the role this show plays in your business, you've got to be checking out the Profitable Podcast Launch Accelerator. Spots are available now for this summer. I love to sit down with you and talk about launching your own show. Either way, I will see you right back here next week. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.